1982, John Belushi, the fabulous comedy star of TV's Saturday Night Live, Animal House, and The Blues Brothers, is dead at the age of 33. 1984, his story becomes a book by Bob Woodward, the prize-winning author of All the President's Men.
You know, this could be one of those stories we've always talked about, that whole Hollywood drug scene out there.
1989, The Man and the Book become the motion picture that Hollywood never wanted to be made. The Life.
Cut the demons loose, John. Let them loose. Boom!
My God, I just punched the star of my movie.
The Laughter.
You scratch my hiney, I'll scratch your hiney.
The Loves.
Please, I'll even marry you.
The Incredible Times.
I use drugs to keep myself alert to the comic possibilities in everything around me.
The Truth.
Belushi told people that drugs were built into his contract. Accidental. What is this, a Saturday Night Live routine? You were a living legend, John. Your friend Aykroyd called you America's guest. Everybody loved you. Why did you shove a needle in your arm?
God's got a saying. Life's not for everyone.
You are so beautiful.
It's not just a story about the man. It's a story about America. Wired. The laughs and times of John Belushi.
A buzz, buzz. A buzz, buzz. A buzz, buzz. What's the name of it?
All right, hello and welcome to the second edition of Drive-In Double Feature. I'm Ryan.
I'm Nathan.
And today we'll be talking about 1989's Wired. So, have you heard of this movie before I even mentioned it to you?
I've seen and heard very little about this.
Yeah, almost zero experience. So instead of us normally talking about like how we heard about this movie or whatever, since it's pretty just we found it or whatever, we just thought of it. Let me ask you this: what has been your experience with the person, the subject matter, John Belushi? What's been your experience with him?
My experience, good question. I remember being a kid and turning on VH1, and it was like they did like a series where it was like movies that changed a generation, and Animal House was on, and I hated it. I hated Animal House. I turned it off. Did not like it. I've not seen it since. I do not feel the same way. I need to rewatch it. But since then, I've seen SNL. I've watched Blues Brothers, and he's a really funny guy. I think Blues Brothers is a great movie, probably the best SNL movie. And he's just a legendary guy. He's funny. What about you?
I mean, everyone Animal House has always been like your dad's favorite college movie, like in our age group. Sort of, it's just like, oh yeah, my daddy saw that movie. It was hilarious. He loved it. But I've never really had that emotional attachment to John Belushi. I mean, he's a really talented guy, but if you weren't like experiencing him when he was at his most popular, I don't think you're gonna love him as much as you would now. So I mean, kind of like someone comparable to during that time period, or during my time period that I would say is comparable to him, would be like a Chris Farley type. Love Tommy Boy, love those types of movies, loved him on SNL. But watching Animal House, it's good, but I was never like blown away by it. Or even Blues Brothers, I'm like, yeah, it was entertaining, but it wasn't like this top tier comedy that everyone really talks about all the time. And I've seen his best of SNL DVD, and it's funny for some of it, but a lot of those early SNLs, I mean, and quite frankly, most SNL episodes, if you watch like the entire episode of like any random episode of SNL, there's a lot of terrible stuff in there.
Yeah, people have like an affinity for like old SNL, and I have never found SNL that funny. Like, there's good skits and sketches, don't get me wrong, but most of the time they become dated. I think SNL in general it gets dated very easily.
Well, it's like you find that one episode that has that one golden sketch, but there's like 6-7 sketches like in an episode, and I mean, like there might be like one winner and then like 6 duds. So
exactly.
Usually those best of compilations are the only good skits that are in there. Because, I mean, I tried watching like the first season of SNL. I had it on DVD, and it is rough. There's just a lot of stuff in there that is not very funny to me, and I'm not connecting with in the slightest.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I tried I wanted to go through the early seasons of SNL, and I stopped because I was just like, I can't do this anymore. Like you said, there's golden stuff, but I do want to say for people that love that era of SNL and love John Belushi, they probably hate this movie. Am I right?
So that's what I was going to say. So like not having this emotional attachment to John Belushi going into this, I was like, he's not like the sacred entertainer that I have to like, how dare you speak ill of John Belushi? So, I was kind of expecting like your typical biopic movie where it shows their rise to fame and then they have like this downward spiral and it kind of ends on this really touching moment, but we don't really get that in this movie. And I'm just going to go say it because I want to get this out right now. This movie sucked. I hated this movie.
Oh, it was bad. No, like, not only is it just like an awful movie, it's just really offensive. I usually don't get too offended, especially about topics like John Belushi, which John Belushi, I'm not invested in this man's life, but watching this movie, I know that it's very just shameful and misguided and just basically pissing on the man's grave.
It's like I said, I didn't mind if there was going to be some negative in here, but this movie it's a hit piece. It's like a total character assassination of the man.
Of a dead man. Of a man who had been dead for years. And for no reason whatsoever. And it's just horrible. Like, it's like probably one of the most scathing hit pieces I've ever seen.
Yeah, and this movie is very hard to come by, and you think it's like these people trying to suppress it, like, oh, they don't want you to know the truth of John Belushi or whatever, but it's not that at all. It's just this movie doesn't deserve any time. It doesn't deserve anybody knowing about it. It doesn't deserve any type of remastering or anything like that because it only had a VHS release, and that's it. Pretty much, this is one movie that needs to become lost media, in my opinion.
It only should exist for people with really morbid curiosity. And let's say, like, you're listening to this and you have that morbid curiosity. Let me tell you, you're not going to enjoy it. It's not good.
It's not worth your time. If you didn't watch this movie in preparation for this episode, this is now a commercial for you to not watch it because I truly, whatever depths we go into describe it, it's not worth it. Trust me.
Yeah, exactly. Just take our review, listen to this, and you'll get the whole experience, I promise you. But yeah, it's Michael Chiklis as John Belushi.
Which I don't even think he's that bad in the role. But
yeah, he's probably one of the better parts of the movie. I don't love him, though. I don't think he does a great job. It seems like he was working with what he had. He wasn't trying to defame John Belushi, but the script was definitely not helping him at all.
And so much so, in fact, that after this movie came out, it pretty much stalled his career.
Which is sad.
He said it stalled his career for over a year because nobody wanted to touch him after that. But, he did go on to have success with a couple of successful TV shows and movies. So he did all right.
He made it out of this, which some actors don't get that ticket.
Right. And this was his very first feature film, too. And he's starring as this giant, larger-than-life personality. So it was a lot to deal with. And it truly, he actually went up to Jim Belushi, John Belushi's brother, afterwards and apologized for being in this movie.
And I know Hollywood has a really problem with this movie because you talked about this a little bit before, but Dan Aykroyd literally cursed this movie with witches, or at least that's what he says.
That's what he says. And knowing what the type of person Dan Aykroyd is, that doesn't really surprise me too much.
Yeah, it's probably literally a cursed movie, which is so funny to me.
But it's just one of those movies that it just doesn't deserve the attention. I mean, if you just let the movie speak for itself and didn't even give it the time of day, I don't think it would have even I don't think it would have the same infamy or anything. But
But I guess like getting into the movie, what I felt like was the most painful part is from the get-go, it has John Belushi in a body bag, and he pops out of the body bag and he realizes he's dead, and it's almost like a comedic scene of him rushing around the morgue.
Butt naked, a dead man, and they are expecting, and he's just running around the hospital screaming because he doesn't realize he's dead, and he's wondering why the hell he's in a morgue.
It's crazy. Not many movies have this reputation that, at least that I've watched, where I knew it was going to be just completely awful from the first minute. But I saw this and I was like, holy crap, this is awful.
Yeah, it has zero respect for the man, too. And the whole movie is kind of told like from this perspective of like It's a Wonderful Life or Ghost of Christmas Past, like Christmas Carol style, where it's this apparition, like his guardian angel is taking him around, like, and showing him like and it's just shaming him like the entire time. It's just like, let me just show you the darkest times of your life and make you just feel like a complete piece of garbage.
Yeah, and his guardian angel, I would hate to have this guardian angel. He's also a taxi driver driving him around. He just calls him stupid. Like, he's like, oh, you did heroin. You did drugs, you dummy. You're so stupid. Why didn't you just stop? Why didn't you stop doing drugs?
Usually when you have like these downward spiral type of movies, like where somebody loses their life to drugs or alcohol, that you have to give them like this likable image, like when you first start the movie, because you have to get invested in the character. So that way, when they do hit rock bottom, it's kind of like this really tragic story. But right from the get-go, they immediately it's like, okay, here's you taking drugs and you yelling at your wife. It doesn't paint a positive picture at all. There's a couple of scenes where it shows him like being romantic with his wife, like, oh, they buried him in the sand. Look how cute that is. But it's very brief.
Yeah, it only tries to make him human a couple times. Like, I feel like whoever wrote this doesn't understand that people get addicted to drugs and what they become. They don't ever want to become that. They don't plan on becoming that. They're literally addicted. This person comes from a spot of like, oh, well, he kept doing drugs. What an idiot. He could have just sat down and stopped. And so he went in with that mindset and didn't want to make him human at all.
Yeah. So the other puzzling thing they made about this movie is like, so the whole movie, just to give you a bit of backstory, is based off of a book called Wired, which was actually written by Bob Woodward, the same man that was responsible for the Watergate scandal being exposed. So he wrote this book about John Belushi's drug addiction that came out right after John Belushi died. And then it eventually got picked up into this feature film. Now, the most puzzling part is the person writing this movie decides to make Bob Woodward a main character in the movie.
Yeah. What the hell was that?
And it goes into this weird, so like at the same time that John Belushi is seeing like the darkest times of his life, it's also like this weird like murder mystery of like trying to figure out how John Belushi died.
Yeah, I don't understand. And I like it, and it's like a murder mystery, and the author gets a section in the book, in the movie. And it also has one of the most bizarre scenes where they're driving down the street, and then they're driving next to the author of the book, and he's like, "That guy? I love that guy. He's making a book about me. Oh, I'm screwed." Like, it was just really bad.
Oh, I know, and it's so weird because it's like John Belushi as a ghost is cursing Bob Woodward, be like, "Bob Woodward, I will kill you if it's the last thing I do," and he's dead. I'm like, what is this going on? What the hell?
Yeah, I don't know, and I know the book isn't like this, but I mean, Bob Woodward he was a consultant on this movie, so he had to know that he was getting inserted into John Belushi's life, even though it's stated in the movie that they weren't in touch like at all, ever. It's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the only like instances that I think John Belushi did a Bob Woodward impression at some point in his career. So
gotcha.
That's about their only connection. But you know, whether you want to say that Bob, I haven't read the book, so I don't know how honest and truthful it is, but I do know the book has, and they play it out in this movie too, is that John Landis actually punches John Belushi in the face, like during the set of Blues Brothers, because he's so coked out that he doesn't even know what's going on. And John Landis said for a fact, like, that never happened. So
wow, it's just sensationalism.
And, you know, I don't know. I mean, he could just be trying to cover for him or whatever. So I don't want to make any assumptions, but it just goes to show you, I just got to be some embellishment in there somewhere, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And I mean, this movie seems to be out to just attack, because even in that John Landis scene, and this was like purposefully put in, a helicopter noises in the background the whole time in the John Landis scene, which, you know, he famously killed people on the set of Twilight Zone with a helicopter crash. You know, he filmed it. He was there for that. And I guess they put in a helicopter noise when his character's in the movie, which I don't have any sympathy for John Landis, but I think that's just like a little fucked up to put that in the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it just really goes to show you that they were, and that just little snippets like that, it just shows that the person who wrote this really does not like John Belushi at all. But at the same time, so the other thing that's in this movie that's really puzzling is that it's also like a best of compilation of John Belushi, where they will play an entire performance of Blues Brothers, or they're like, oh, let's just play an entire sketch of his famous samurai character playing baseball, and it goes on forever.
Yeah, it's this movie's surprisingly boring, because it wants, like you said, it cuts in SNL skits, but some of them aren't actual SNL skits. I looked it up because I didn't recognize any of them. They put in their own skits. They weren't all reenactments, because I guess they didn't have access to it.
Yeah, because they did not, SNL didn't give them permission to do this movie, and they pretty much, which is why, because I'm almost certain too, like they had a very minuscule budget going into this movie, so that's why SNL looks like it's filmed in somebody's garage. So. Yeah,
it looks horrible. Yeah, it's so weird, because they didn't get people's names other than Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. And like it's hard to recognize quite what's going on or what they're going for sometimes.
It kind of gives like these vague similarities where it's like, okay, you know John Belushi, here's all these famous sketches. I mean, don't you love John Belushi? But it's without like the proper context, because it jumps back and forth between his life too. So there is one scene where it's dead John Belushi watching him and Dan Aykroyd drive through John Belushi's old town, and he's like, oh yeah, that's where I grew up as a kid. And so he has his flashback, starts having a flashback to when he was like younger. It's very weird, and the movie is terribly paced. Oh, yeah. It's only an hour and 40 minutes, but it feels like it's 2.5 hours, honestly.
Yeah, I spaced out at some point. There's a good chunk where I just got tired of it, and it was just so boring. Nothing really happens. These flashbacks have no importance in the movie either.
So at the very end of the movie, John Belushi is taking heroin, or that a woman has given him. She's administered heroin into him, and he starts ODing in his hotel room from this random woman. And Bob Woodward, who's out the whole movie, is doing like this investigative piece where he's asking all these people that knew John Belushi all these questions. All of a sudden, he starts having like an out-of-body experience where now he is interviewing a dying John Belushi who's in his bed, dying.
Deathbed, yeah.
He's on his last breaths. And like the woman in there is like, oh, Bob Woodward, do you want some drugs? and he turns her down. And like at that point, it's so offensive, because Bob Woodward begins admonishing John Belushi. He's like, John, you had it all. Why would you give it all up for drugs? And he's like, oh, I had a crappy childhood. He's like, no, you didn't. Your family gave you everything. You had a bunch of friends. You had money. Why would you even do drugs in the first place? It's like this weird PSA for anti-drugs, but it's kind of like implying that John Belushi was this idiot who had no reason at all for taking drugs when we don't know exactly what his mental health state was at that point or why he was even doing it in the first place.
Exactly. And it goes into like, because he even says it like, John, it's all your fault. Other people helped you, but it is all your fault. And it kind of gives a free pass to the people that enabled him. Because in his last moments, how he died was speedball that he didn't even inject. He had somebody else inject that into him. And it doesn't even want to acknowledge the people that enabled and gave him the drugs as well. It wants to just blame John Belushi for everything.
Yeah, because, I mean, Dan Aykroyd, his manager, both times like, John, you shouldn't do drugs. But let's be honest, during that time, so many famous people were doing drugs at that time. So how could you not be in an environment like that when you're surrounded by all these famous people and they're all snorting coke? And it's like, I'll snort a little coke. Everyone else is doing it. So, I mean, you don't really know. I mean, it's just the excess of that point. It's no wonder like somebody with an addictive personality wouldn't get hooked on something like that and end up taking their life.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Maybe it would have been better to take an angle on something wrong with Hollywood in general at that time, because that was just kind of, you hear that all the time. It's like, oh, we just did coke back in those days. That's all we did. Everybody was doing it. Maybe should have taken some kind of angle on that rather than just blame it all on John.
And if that wasn't insulting enough, that final scene, and then the movie takes a Seventh Seal route where the guardian angel actually tempts John Belushi, being like, hey, if you beat me in this pinball game, I'll let you come back to life. And he's like, oh yeah, I could. Yeah. And, he starts getting optimistic, and John Belushi, he starts playing pinball, and, he's doing okay. And then the guardian angel does it. And, of course the guardian angel's, kicking his butt in pinball. Mm-hmm. And John Belushi is pleading with the angel to let him live, saying like, I will give everything. Just let me have my life back, please. So he's begging for his life, and he's like, no, you're dead. Sorry. Just a big F you, like at the end.
Who thought this was a good idea, right? Like, who thought, like, oh, you're like, this is John Belushi is somebody's favorite actor out there, and if they sat down and watched this movie, and then there's a scene where like John Belushi pleads to come back to life, I'd be so mad. I'd be so offended.
Oh, one other hugely offensive scene that you can see that is in this movie. So John Belushi's dead. So at one point, they actually are performing an autopsy on John Belushi's dead body, but he's a ghost. So he's awake during the entire time, and he could feel everything. So he's being cut apart. And also the doctor that's performing it is Asian. So they're like, oh, well, now he's a samurai. He's hacking up John Belushi. And there's a laugh track playing as John Belushi's dead body is being hacked apart and organs are being taken out of his system. And he's screaming like, as he's getting sliced open.
Yeah, he's mugging to the camera and everything. And I just don't know. It almost feels like misguided, right? Like the way out would be, oh, John Belushi would have wanted a comedy about his life. He would have wanted it to be silly. I don't know. I highly doubt anybody would want this made about their life. Anything like this. Comedian.
I just imagine like his loved ones going and his friends going to see this movie and watching this scene where it's somebody that they loved as a person, and they just have to watch their dead body being mangled, like as their soul is screaming for help.
And like being angry in the audience, but the laugh track is just rolling.
That's all I can say about it. It's really bad. It's not worth the time. It's not watching it as so bad. It's a good movie. It's a waste of time, and it does not deserve any recognition whatsoever.
I've seen a lot of movies in my life, but this ranks as one of the worst I've ever seen. And I know that because I got zero enjoyment out of it, and would never, I don't even know an audience this would be good for. It's not good for anybody.
Right. That's the thing. Like usually when I try to think of like a movie at the end, I'm like, I can at least think of some sect of movie fans that would like it. But this one, it's really hard to imagine that, which On IMDb, there are positive reviews for it, just so you know. So
sounds about right. There's always every movie is somebody's favorite movie.
Which, if you're interested, go read those. But it's not one that we'll be seeing anytime soon. Well, Nathan, I know we're going to be talking about something next time. Which movie will we be talking about next time?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the movie Cop from 1988, simple title. It is on Tubi, our best friend over here on Drive-In Double Feature. So if you want to give it a watch before that episode, go watch it. Give it a shot.
Totally free. Don't have to pay a cent for it.
Yeah, that's why I love Tubi.